Okay, hey guys. So we're gonna do chapter 3 here. I'm already jumping ahead, sorry. Um, I've also got my book out so I can look up definitions if I need to. So medical, legal, and ethical issues. Once again, I use this word a lot, common sense, but we're going to talk about them. So, we're going to talk about consent and refusal of care and how we deal with those. Confidentiality, which is going to be your HIPAA. Um, which I think we talked a little bit about in 1 and 2. Advanced directives, tort and criminal actions, evidence, preservation on like crime scenes and stuff, and then statutory responsibilities. A lot of this is going to be like just kind of learning definitions, and I know that's kind of boring, but mandatory reporting, certain situations we find ourselves in. Uh, it needs to go to a higher level, whether that be law enforcement or your supervisor or DHS, that kind of stuff. Ethical principles, moral obligations, and end of life issues. So a basic principle of emergency care is do no further harm. And that can be really confusing. And we're going to get into all this when we start doing assessments and stuff. You're going to find that sometimes what we're doing is causing pain, but we're actually doing it to help the patient. So I don't want you to get confused there. This is, um, we follow our scope of practice, which we're going to talk about later also, um, to improve patient condition throughout the time we are with them. A healthcare provider usually avoids legal exposure if he or she acts so in good faith or according to the appropriate standards of care. So let's talk a little bit about consent. This is getting permission to render care or to treat those patients. A person must give consent for treatment for the most part. There's different types of consent we can get. If the patient is conscious and rational, he or she has a legal right to refuse that care. Um, if they are able, it's simple questions like, can you tell me your birth date? Where are we? How many quarters are in a dollar? If they can answer those type of questions, then they are within their rational right mind. Um, then they can tell you, no, I don't want to go to the doctor. And this is where you're going to hear me preach a lot about educating your patient comes in very handy. Um, this foundation of consent is decision-making capacity. Can they understand information provided? Can they make informed choices regarding medical care? Um, we've kind of already talked about that. The patient's knowledge, he or she wants, oh, sorry, expressed consent. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's expressed. The patient acknowledges he or she wants to be provided care and or transport. Um, to be valid, the patient must provide information or informed consent. Um, they express that they want treated. They express that they want transported. Um, you've explained the treatment, risk, and benefits to the patient, and this is that education portion. By the end of this book, I hope that you are educated enough that you can educate patients. Remember that they don't have the medical background, most of them that we do, so we talk to them in layman terms. And if we are able to explain what's going on with them, what treatments we would like to do and how it will benefit them. A lot of times we can win these patients over. You're still going to get those ones who refuse, but so anyway, express consent is they are expressing that they do want help. Implied consent. This is for patients who are unconscious or incapable of making informed decisions, whether it's an altered mental status, it's an unconsciousness, um, those type of things. It is implied when a serious I'm trying to read this, sorry. When a serious threat to life exists and the patient is unconscious or otherwise unable to give consent, the law assumes that the patient would give consent. So we're kind of assuming, yes, they do want help. There's no DNR. The patient called us themselves. Um, the neighbors found the patient, and there's no indication that the patient doesn't want help. So we assume uh, it's implied that they would want assistance. Should never be used unless there is a threat to life or limb. Principle of implied consent is known as emergency doctrine, and try to get consent from a spouse or relative if possible. And we're going to talk in chapter 4 about documentation. We could also get that spouse or relative to sign as a witness that they this patient was okay with us taking them, or they made the decision for us to take that patient. Involuntary consent applies to patients who are mentally ill in a behavioral crisis, developmentally delayed. Obtaining consent from guardians. It's not always possible to get guardians or caregivers, so you need to understand your local protocols. If these patients are mentally ill, they don't know, they don't understand the consequences of not receiving help versus receiving help, or they're just not mentally okay, then we can't kidnap them. What I would like to do on these cases is probably get law enforcement involved, if the caregiver's not available. So minors and consent. So we do. It's best to have a parent give us that right, or the legal guardian. But in some cases, the minor can give consent. Uh, I never can say that word. The emancipated. I can't say it. This means that a minor is married. They're in the armed services. They've moved out on their own. Um, they have children of their own, but they're still under 18. These minors are allowed to make their own decisions. And then things like at schools. So teachers and school officials may act in the place of parents. I've been on several of these calls where we run on a child, there is no guardian available. And I think about it, talks about it in the next slide, but we treat children as if their parents would want them treated. In true emergencies, do treat the patient. Um, Consent is implied, this especially in children. Never just let a patient suffer. Foreseeable or forcible, sorry, restraints. So sometimes necessary with combative patients, legally permissible. Consult medical control, may require law enforcement. I'm going to tell you, if at all possible, use law enforcement. Um, you're going to get these with drug-related issues sometimes. You can actually get these with stroke-related issues, and with elderly patients even. We don't want to harm them or let them harm themselves, and we sure don't want them harming us. Uh, so the best thing you can do is call medical control, tell them exactly what we got going on, and then document, which we're going to talk about in chapter 4, why restraints was used. Once applied, do not remove restraints in or out unless they are posing a risk to the patient. Consider calling ALS backup to provide chemical, uh, paralegical restraint, so knock them down. Uh, I've only had to use restraints a couple times in my 6 years of EMS, um, and both of them were after we Narcan someone and they came out of it. So the right to refuse treatment, if they're conscious, alert adult with decision-making capacity, um, have the high, sorry, they have the right to refuse treatment, can withdraw from treatment at any time, even if the result is death or serious injury. Calls involving refusals are frequently litigated and involve online medical control and document this consultation. So we talked a little bit ago about this. If a patient is able to answer those questions appropriately, what's your name? What's your birthday? Where are we at? What happened? How many quarters are in a dollar? What color of shirt do I have on? Um, no trick questions. It needs to be straightforward. Um, if they can answer those, they're in their right mind and they can refuse. This is where it's our job to educate, um, and try to convince them, okay, so you don't want to go with me. You can go private vehicle. I truly believe that you need to go because of X, Y, and Z. Um, if you fail to see a medical professional, this is what the outcome could be. So our knowledge will pay off by educating the patient. Um, and then once again, document everything. If they refuse, they refuse, they refuse, and uh, you know that it's a serious situation, do your best to educate them. Um, Real quick story, went on a guy who fell, cracked his head open. We bandaged, we treated, would not be transported. He refused transport, refused transport. He answered questions appropriately. We tried and tried and tried to get him to go. Um, 2 hours later, he calls us back, or his son does, and he's super confused. He's got, everything about him's different. Um, and I'm not so sure. It was just either that day or the next day, they took him to Oklahoma City and he died from a massive bleed in the brain. When the son called the second time, we took him to the hospital. But that was 2 hours down the road. Pressure had already started building up. So it's super important that we educate, we follow our local protocols, and don't be surprised if you get called back to that scene after a refusal. Assess the patient's ability to make an informed decision. So ask and repeat questions, assess the patient's answers, and observe the patient's behavior. If the patient appears confused or delusional, you cannot assume that the decision to refuse is an informed refusal. Law enforcement, if they're combative, if they're arguing, if their body language is telling you something and you know it's bad, but they are still confused or combative, if they're not answering questions appropriately, that you have the right to transport, because that could be considered a life threat depending on the call, nature of the call. So don't ever be afraid to use that, law enforcement. Providing treatment is a much more defensible position than failing to treat a patient. Do not endanger yourself. Use the assistance of law enforcement, which we just talked about. Yeah, never get yourself in a bad position. Don't get backed into a corner. Always have an exit route. Um, you and your partner, those are your two main concerns. Every time those tones drop, you and your partner are priority one and two. Let's see. Before you leave the scene where a patient or parent of a caregiver or caregiver have refused care, encourage the individual again to allow care. Ask the individual to sign the refusal form. Witness is valuable in these situations and document all refusals. So there you go. We want witnesses, we want signatures, we want plenty of documentation as to the condition of the patient. They were within their right mind and they still refused. Document what you told them, document how you educated them. Um, it just covers your butt, really. Um, Confidentiality, we've kind of hit on this, but it includes patient history, assessment findings, treatment provided. Information generally cannot be disclosed except if the patient signs a release, if a legal subpoena is presented, if it is needed by a billing personnel. So pretty much we don't talk about things. Yes, you're going to hear me tell stories. I never have names. I never have addresses. I never give dates. Um, and I use mine for education purposes. You'll never see a picture of a patient. Um, Same thing. If you get a really fun call, be very careful. Talk to your supervisor or talk to your partner, but don't just go around town talking about it because someone's going to know what you're talking about. Um, So HIPAA, it contains a section of patient privacy, strengthens privacy laws, safeguards patient confidentiality, considered information to be protected health information. Um, just remember that date, 1996 is when HIPAA kind of took effect. Failure to abide by the provisions of HIPAA law can result in civil and or criminal action. You can lose your job, you can lose your license. The general public is often permitted by law to record identifying and protected patient information and images. So social media, we all use it. It's the way of life now. Avoid agency logos, uniforms, vehicles, or other markings associated with your agency while off duty. Conduct yourself professionally on and off duty. Free speech does not mean that everyone has the right to say anything under circumstances and without repercussions. So when you get your license and you go to work, you're excited. Um, you're going to want to take pictures and selfies and Snapchats and know your agency's stance on this. You go to my Facebook right now, I have pictures of me standing beside my ambulance. I was excited. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I did it. We don't take pictures on scenes. We don't do any of that. The other thing, conduct yourself professionally on and off duty. Depending on where you work, these smaller areas like where I live, people look at the EMS to be there when they need help. That's what we do. So if I'm out at the bar getting trashed every Saturday night, that looks bad. So we do have to have a higher expectation and standard of ourselves. Um, Not saying you can't go have fun. Just be smart about it because people recognize you in and out of uniform and you will be judged in and out of uniform. Um, so just keep that in mind. Advanced directives. An advanced directive specifies treatment should the patient become unconscious or unable to make decisions. A do not resuscitate or a DNR order is an advanced directive that gives permission not to resuscitate. Do not resuscitate does not mean do not treat. Do not resuscitate means do not perform CPR. That patient just needs some oxygen. We can give them oxygen. That patient, you know, blood sugar's low, we can give them that D10 or D50 and get their blood sugar up. DNR, do not resuscitate, do not perform CPR. But if they have a DNR, it has to be present, it has to be in hand, it has to be signed. So we need a paper copy. So if you walk in a house and someone's in cardiac arrest and family screaming, and we've got the DNR, she's got a DNR, you have to ask for it. Okay, I need it. Do you have a copy of it? If you don't have a copy of it, I'm fixing to start CPR. It's very important you understand that about DNRs. Other names for advanced directive is a living will, healthcare directive. I can't talk today. DNR orders must meet the following requirements. So, statement of the patient's medical problems, signatures of a patient and legal guardian, signature of the physician, and not expired. One more thing on this. If you arrive and the patient is alert, but is trending down quickly, like you feel that you might be coding someone quickly, and that patient says, I don't want to die, you can say, do you want to void your DNR? If that patient can answer questions appropriately, they have a right to void that DNR. This is a very rare circumstance where they can answer those questions, but sometimes it does happen. I've had it once. So keep that in mind. Just a picture there, pre-hospital medical care directive. In the event of a cardiac or respiratory arrest, I refuse any resuscitation measures, including cardiac compressions, no intubation or any other advanced airway. So they don't want CPR pretty much. That's what that is. Let's see, physician order for a life-sustaining treatment or POLST, and medical orders from life-sustaining treatments, MOLST. Um, Explicitly describe acceptable interventions for the patient, must be signed by an authorized medical provider. Contact medical control for guidance. So if family ends up handing you this piece of paper that makes a little bit of sense, try to read it the best you can. Um, and then call your medical control and say, hey, this is what family handed me, this is what it said, and they can actually walk you through this. Some patients may have named surrogates to make decisions for them. So it's a durable power of attorney or healthcare, also known as a healthcare proxy. Due to the growing number of hospice home health programs, you may face this situation. Um, Home health is a really big thing here lately, and you might deal with some of this. Physical signs of death. Physician determines the cause of death. The pre-symptomatic signs of death. So, unresponsiveness to painful stimuli, which we're going to learn about the different types of stimuli in our assessments. Lack of a carotid pulse or heartbeat, absence of breath sounds, no deep tendon or coronal reflexes. Physical signs of death. Again, absence of eye movement, no systolic blood pressure, profound cyanosis, lowered or decreased body temperature. Another definitive sign, body part decapitation or dependent lividity. So blood settling or pooling is another word for that. So this person has been on their back, they are passed away, and all the blood, gravity does what gravity does. It has leaked out of the vessels and veins and arteries, and it's actually pooling in the lower area of the body. Definitive signs of death. So rigor mortis or stiffening, uh, algor mortis, so cooling of the body until it matches the ambient environment. So it's room temperature or whatever the environment is, that's the temperature that the body is. And then decompensation occurs between 40 to 96 hours after death. Um, rigor mortis is about 2 to 12 hours after death. Involvement sorry, trying to read it. Medical examiner cases. So involvement depends on the nature or the scene of the death. So what happened, what caused it? The examiner notified in the case of like dead on arrival, dead on the scene, death without previous medical care, suicide, violent death, poisoning, known or suspected. We're going to call that medical examiner. And usually law enforcement takes care of this. Um, the examiner notified in cases of death with accident, suspicious of criminal acts, or infant or child deaths. Organ donors express a wish to donate their organs. Evidence by information on the organ donor card and or driver's license. Your priority is to save the patient's life. Remember that organs need oxygen. So you're going to see a funny test question or quiz question about whether you perform CPR on a cardiac arrest um, because the patient is an organ donor, or do you focus on saving the organs? Our job is to keep them alive, not to harvest organs. I promise it's going to be a test or quiz question. I remember it. It was kind of comical to me. So that's kind of what a card's going to look like. And then we all know when you get your driver's license, do you want to be an organ donor? I think they put like a heart or something on your driver's license. Medical identification, insignia, bracelet, necklace, keychains, and card indicating DNA order, allergies, diabetes, epilepsy. Some patients wear a medical bracelet with a USB flash drive. I am not an expert at this. I know cell phones have an emergency medical. You can get in and get their medical history. Um, Those can be used. Like this little kid here has a bracelet on. Just give a quick glance. Don't waste time looking for this stuff though. If you see it, awesome. If you don't, we're moving. We don't spend a whole lot of time searching for the bracelets or whatever it might be. Scope of practice. I'll back up. One more thing, Ben, we're talking about a little bit of patient history. Someone's going to be around, hopefully. Ask family, ask neighbors, ask friends. Let them do the work. Let them go search for paperwork while you treat the patient. So, scope of practice, we've already heard this word or these words a whole lot. Your scope of practice is what you are legally trained to do and have been signed off to do. This is what our medical director allows us to do. It outlines the care you are able to provide, usually defined by state law. Medical director further defines by developing protocols and standing orders. So at some point in class, I'm going to pull up protocols on my computer or on my phone. I'm going to show you guys how to read a protocol and how kind of how we follow the process of a protocol. It is literally a chart. Like you start with respiratory issue. Is the patient breathing? Yes. So over here we go down and it says, are they breathing adequately? Or over here it says no, begin BVM. And it's step by step by step of what we can do by each EMS level, if that makes sense. I'll try to find a good example of a protocol and I will post it on here so you guys can look at it and we will go over them in class as well. Standing orders, once again, this is what we're allowed to do, signed off by that medical director. A standing order, we don't have to have permission. If we need to do something different, that's when we call and we do online medical direction, right? Carry out procedures outside scope of practice may be considered negligence or criminal offense. So, as an EMT, you are not allowed to do like an ET tube. You can't intubate, but if you did it, you could be considered guilty of negligence or criminal offense. It's stepping outside your scope, stepping outside of what you're trained to do. Standard of care, so a manner in which you must act and behave. You must be concerned about the safety and welfare of others. Um, be a good person. It's that simple. Um, you act right, you behave correctly, you show compassion and empathy. You don't have to worry about standard of care. If you're short, if you're mean, if you just walk in, you just kind of throw stuff out of the way and you push this old lady's stuff off her table so you have room to do your vitals and um, you cuss at them, that is not a standard of care. Um, it's kind of established by local custom and law, statutes, ordinance, administrative regulation, or case laws, professional and institutional standards. Um, yeah, I'm not getting all that. Standards imposed by the State Medical Practices Act, certification, licensing, credentialing. So we really didn't talk a whole lot about credentialing. Credentialing is when you are signed off and allowed to do things. You credential. Um, you've earned your medical director's right to do your scope of practice. Duty to act. So this one gives a lot of people individuals' responsibility to provide patient care. Duty to act applies once your ambulance responds to a call, once treatment has began. Um, see if I can find it here in my book because there was something I wanted to add to that. Oh, duty to act. Okay, so know your local protocols. So if I'm on duty. I have a duty to act. I have a duty to respond to any emergency. Um, if I'm driving down the highway and I see a wreck, yes, I'm an advanced EMT. Do I have a duty to act? Some places, if I'm off duty, I'm off duty. It depends on your state or local protocol. Other places, if I'm off duty and I have a license and I don't stop and someone finds out, then I can be held responsible for not caring for that patient. So know your local area, know your protocols. I think most of us do this job. All of us would stop and help someone in need. Um, but it's not, not everyone has to. We'll put it that way. Negligence, so failure to provide the same care that a person with similar training would provide in the same similar situation. So, as an EMT, you're expected to take care of every single patient the exact same that you're that another EMT would at your same level. Um, do we all handle situations different? Do we see things differently? Yes. Yeah, we might all take a different route to get to the same ending. Um, but this is where protocols come in. If we follow our protocols, then we're all going to end at the same goal. So negligence is not providing the same care that someone with your same training would have given. All four of the following elements must be present for negligence to actually apply. So duty, breach of duty, damages, and um, cautions. I can't talk today to save my life. Let's see. The cause of the injury was in the control of the EMT. Generally does not occur unless there is a negligence. Um, the conduct of the person being sued is alleged to have occurred in clear violation of the statute or civic wrongs. Abandonment, this one's pretty easy to understand. Um, Unilateral termination of care by the EMT without patient's consent, making provisions for continuing care. Abandonment may take place at the scene in the emergency department. Always obtain a signature on the patient care report or record. So once you make contact with that patient, that is your patient, that is your responsibility. You are not allowed to leave or end treatment until someone of the same or higher level of care takes over. So if you're treating someone and you're an EMT and an EMR walks up and goes, "Oh, I'll take over," you can't just leave. They're yours until a level same with you or higher takes over. Now, if I walked in and said, "Hey, I got this, you're good," cool, I'll take over. You give me a report, it's all good. Um, so you cannot leave a patient once you start care. Assault and battery and kidnapping. So assault, unlawfully placing person in fear or immediately bodily harm. Example is restraints. We talked about those. If it is unneeded and you do it anyway, that's assault. Battery is unlawfully touching a person. Example, providing care without consent. Um, to me, these were always kind of confusing because I would think that assault would be that, but battery is unlawfully touching. You didn't get permission to touch them. You didn't get permission to treat them. That is why, as we get into this, you announce yourself as you approach that patient. You start talking to them as soon as you enter the door, as soon as you're on scene. We begin communicating with these patients. That way they know where they're aware of who we are, what we're doing. Kidnapping, so seizing, confining, abducting, or carrying away by force. Example, transporting against their will. You can't just If that old lady doesn't want to go or that old man doesn't want to go, you can't just pick them up, carry them to the ambulance. Um, False imprisonment, unauthorized confinement of a person. We can't stick them in a truck and lock the doors. We can't lock them in their bedrooms. Um, like I said, some of them are pretty common sense. Defamation, communication of false information that damages reputation of a person, whether it is, if it's written, it's liberal. If it's slander, it is spoken. We can't go around just talking trash. We can't go ruin someone's reputation. It is illegal if you hold a license. So, Good Samaritan law and immunity. If you responsibly help another person, you will not be held liable for errors or omissions. Good Samaritan conditions to be met. You treat them in good faith. You're helping in good faith, without expectation of compensation. Okay, so I helped you. So what are you going to get for me? You can't do that. Within the scope of training, once again, you can't be out there dropping ET tubes if you're not trained to do it. Uh, did not act in grossly neglected manner. Here we go. That gross negligence. Sorry, I con conduct that constitutes willful or reckless disregard. Immunity status applies to EMS systems that are considered governmental agencies. Sovereign immunity provides legislation and liability to immunity is not complete. I really, really honestly hate this chapter. Um, Compile a record of all incidents involving sick and injured patients, records and reporting, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. Important safeguard against legal complications. Court considered an action not recorded was never performed. Incomplete or untidy report is evidence of poor emergency medical care. So what this is saying, when we do our patient care reports in chapter 4, if you don't document it, it never happened. If it's not documented, it never happened. And then if it's just thrown together, just random everywhere, there's no consistency, there's no uh, definitive explanation as to what happened, why you did what you did, how the outcome was, then it's considered a poor emergency care. It's because the documentation does not state word for word what you did. National EMS information system, so provide the ability to collect, store, and share standardized EMS data used to improve the speed and accuracy of data collection. Most states have a reportable obligation, so abuse of a child, old person, or others, injury during commission of a felony, drug-related injuries, or childbirth. There are certain times when we need to report things. We need to take them a step further. We are the voice of the patient, and we're there to do what we can to help those patients. I like to, and this is my personal, if I truly feel that there's a abuse or something, when I get to that hospital, I report it to the physician or the charge nurse. I also call my director and say, this is what I seen, this is what I think. And usually they will have you fill out an incident report. Most states have a reporting obligation. Again, attempted suicide, dog bites, communicable diseases, assault, domestic violence, sexual assault or rape, exposure to infectious diseases, transport of a patient in restraints, scene of a crime, uh, the deceased. All of these things are things that we might have to report. Ethics and responsibilities, so philosophy of right and wrong, moral duties, and ideal professional behavior. morality, the code of ethics or code of conduct, I'm sorry, affecting character, uh, conduct and consent, consents. I can't talk. Bio ethics is specially addressed information that arises in the practice of healthcare. Requires you to evaluate and apply ethics standards, your own, those of the professional, allows rules, laws, and policies to guide your decision making. Be a good person. That's it. So, the EMT in court. You can end up in court as a witness or a defendant. Case can be civil or criminal. Whenever called to testify or uh, notify your local service director and your legal counsel. As witness, remain neutral. You're not there to judge. Review run reports before court. So this is why, and we're going to talk about it in the next chapter. Run reports, your documentation is so important because it might be next week after your call, and it might be 2 years after this call happened. You need to be able to pick up your report, read it, and remember that run. 2 years later, you need to be able to remember that patient, what happened, why you made the decisions you made. That's why it's so important that our run reports are documented correctly. As a defendant, an attorney is required. Defense may include status of limitation, governmental immunity, or contributable negligence. Discovery allows both sides to obtain more information through written requests and questions or oral questions. Most cases are settled following the discovery phase during a settlement phase. If not settled, the case goes to trial. Damages that may be awarded, compensatory damages or punitive damages. An EMT charged with criminal offense should secure the services of a highly experienced criminal attorney immediately. If you get called to court, hopefully you are in no wrong. No, study that report, read the narrative, and have a good attorney. Hopefully this never happens. So real quick, you arrive at the scene of an older woman complaining of chest pain. In assessing her, she holds her arm out for you to take a blood pressure. This is an example of implied consent, informed express consent, or emergency consent. Well, I'm going to say probably expressed. She held her arm out for you. She acknowledged that she wanted your treatment. So C. Two, which of the following is an example of abandonment? An EMT leaves the scene after a competent adult has refused care. An EMT transfers care of the patient to emergency department nurse. An advanced EMT transfers care of the patient to a paramedic, or an advanced EMT transfers care to an EMR. So, moi, if I transfer care to an EMR and I walk out and leave, I abandoned that patient. So it is D. Um, the unauthorized confinement of a person is called, well, it's not assault, not battery, it's not slander, so false imprisonment. C. Failure of an EMT to provide the same care as another EMT with the same training is called negligence. An 8-year-old boy was struck by a car, is unconscious, and is bleeding from the mouth. A police officer tells you that he is unable to contact the child's parents. You should continue to treat the child and transport as soon as possible. Cease all treatment until the child's parents can be contacted. Continue with treatment only if authorized by medical control. Provide airway management only until parents are contacted. We talked about this. It's going to be we're going to treat that child, right? An advance directive is a set of specific guidelines that clearly define the different types of consent, a formal list that defines by state law whether the patient has decision-making capability or capacity, a written document that specifies the care you should provide to the patient if unable to make decisions, a verbal order given by the dying patient's family. Yeah, see. Which of the following patients is competent and can legally refuse EMS care? A confused young female, a man who is staggering and states that he drank only 3 beers, a conscious and alert woman who is severe pain with a broken leg, a diabetic patient who is slurring speech. I'm going to have to go with C. That's the only one that's actually clicking right. 8, you are treating a patient with an appropriate emotional crisis. After the patient refuses treatment, you tell him that you will call the police and have him restrained if he does not give you consent. Your actions in this case are an example of that is actually considered assault. And the way it was taught to me, just real quick, is if the guy's being a pain in the butt and I threaten to use a bigger IV, if he doesn't start behaving. That's assault. That's threatening or making the patient feel endangered. The EMT has a legal duty to act if he or she off duty and witnesses a major car accident. A volunteer is on duty and is dispatched on the call, paying for his or her service, paid for him or her services, out of their jurisdiction. B, a volunteer, or you're on duty, or you get dispatched to the call. It is your duty to act. Which of the following statements about records and reports is false? Legally, if it was not documented, it was not performed. Okay, that's true. A competent or a complete, accurate report is an important safeguard against legal problems. That's true. An incomplete or untidy patient care report is evidence of incomplete or inexperienced emergency medical care. That is true. Your patient care report does not become a part of the patient hospital record because your treatment was provided outside the hospital. That is false. We fax our patient care reports to the receiving hospital, so it technically is part of their reports. All right, guys, that is chapter 3. That was a rough one. I won't lie, that's one of my least favorite ones to teach. So I will see you next on chapter 4, where we're going to dive into communication and documentation.